far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. 100 women growing strong. 100 women where you belong. You stood tall and now you see, you have reached your destiny. Woman, woman.
As people of African descent, we offer this land recognition in solidarity with the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island in the efforts and deliberate intentions toward decolonization. As people of African descent, we acknowledge the land of Turtle Island that sustains us, express deep gratitude to its indigenous peoples, and pledge to honor our dignity and divinity that ultimately connects us all. By Kay Johnson. Welcome to 100 ABC Fireside Chats. 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women is a bold project initiated by co-authors and co-founders, the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, Dr. Denise O'Neill Green, and Donna Jones Simmons. Our mission is to celebrate and archive the professional accomplishments of trailblazing Black women from all across Canada. The goal is to create an ever-expanding database available for current and future generations via print media, public and private libraries, as well as our website, which is www.100abcwomen.ca. In addition to our fireside chats on topics that matter to our communities, such as education, healthcare, entertainment, creative arts, trade union, and so much more, we offer biennial book launching galas and biannual symposiums. The co-authors and co-founders would like to take this opportunity to thank each of you for attending today's fireside chat. We know that you will find these sessions educational and inspirational. So sit back, relax, and hear from our brilliant and talented honorees.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to today's Fireside Chat. It is such a pleasure to be here with our panelists today. I've had a pre-chat with them and they're here to talk today about our major life transitions, career changes, caregiving, the responsibilities, the financial stress, all the things that lead to stress and mental health. And so today, we are joined by Mariette Gibril, Lily Missy Searle's not with us, but hopefully she'll join, Alethea Kador, Adebola Adefoye, and Dr. Sian Wilson. So I'd like to introduce them to you at this point, and they will join for a wonderful conversation. So welcome, ladies. So we have Miriat Jibril, she's an award-winning executive leader, speaker, and founder of Better Not Bitter Society and MIJ Consulting. Through her work in leadership development, mental wellness, and belonging, she helps individuals and organizations build cultures where people can thrive through change. A survivor, advocate, community builder, Marriott is passionate about turning adversity into resilience and creating spaces where healing, connection, and hope can flourish. Welcome, Marriott.
Okay.
Next on the panel, we have Dr. Sian Wilson. She's an associate professor and Canada Research Chair in Community-Based Research, Ethics, and Wellbeing based at Wilfrid Laurier University. Dr. Wilson is the 2023 Robbins Olivier Award recipient for Excellence in Equity. Congratulations. And she has extensive experience in research, consulting, advocacy, and community development related to Black, Indigenous, and racialized community health and well-being. Welcome.
Hi.
Hi. Also with us is Adebola Adefoye, and she is the founder and executive director of the Afro Women and Youth Foundation and team lead at Adebola Adefoye Consulting. I'm sorry if I got your last name all wrong there. And she is advancing equity, mental health, and newcomer inclusion through community programs and professional training. She holds a master's degree in child and youth care, a graduate certificate in mental health intervention, a bachelor of social work, and she's not quite finished yet because she's pursuing her PhD in policy studies. Welcome, Adebola. Alethea Cador is a registered psychotherapist, wellness advocate, and founder of Minds Like Consulting and Community Practice Incorporated, supporting individuals and communities in building resilience and emotional well-being. She creates accessible spaces for healing, growth, and connection. And Alethea is passionate about reducing stigma and empowering people to navigate life's transitions with compassion and strength. So welcome, Alethea. So thank you for joining us today. And, we are here to talk about an issue that sadly many of us know people, even outside of our professional lives, who are facing increased mental health difficulties. And I heard recently that, well, the upcoming awards ceremony for 100 ABC will be preceded by a special day of discussion about the crisis in terms of female suicide and amongst Black women. And so that's something to keep on our minds. And we're looking forward to hearing what experts have to say on that. But just to give us an idea, and I want to open it up for each of you to give a kind of a summary from a personal perspective of why you think this issue of mental health and building resilience is significant, and how do you come to this work? So anyone who wants to start.
Well, I can start. Again, my name is Marriott Jibril. Such a pleasure to be here. So I'm very passionate when it comes to the topic around mental health. And, I like also using the word mental wellness. So just to give us a check to say that's where we want to have the conversation run into. I've had my own lived experience. And I think when you have a lived experience, you come with a different lens to really see give a lot of insight into what the issues are. The mental health is broad. It's not a one single element. So we can talk about stress or burnt out or things like that. And then we can go back and talk about, other disability like, neurodivergent and, ADHD and so many other things. As a mom to a neurodivergent son, so I come with that lens. And as someone who has survived cancer twice, I come with that lens. And then, different transitions, broken relationship, gender-based violence, I come with that lens as well. So I always say I have a huge resume of, pain and trauma, But I always also say pain and trauma are inevitable. We have to choose to be better. And so where that lands us is, what are the resources out there? What are the support? Um, because of that passion and that lived experience, I formed an organization, Better Not Bitter Society, where we dismantle the stigma of mental health, particularly in the marginalized community where there is a lot of taboo to even talk about it, and where we can give a lot of awareness and education and turn that into a thriving community. So a lot of people are
Mhm.
in survival mode. So the focus is turning everything into a thriving community where people can get access, and not just get access, but timely care and support. What I've noticed so far is a lot of people are on long wait list to even access psychologists or psychiatrists diagnoses or support. And then we have to also understand mental health is health. So if people are waiting that long for a diagnosis and for care and for support, and sometimes some people just need to be medicated, things get worse, like your physiological health gets worsened. And so time here is critical. And I think we need to start thinking about how can we stop this long wait and get
Yes,
people.
I think that's important. The other
Yeah.
thing is that if you're a Black woman or a Black person, generally speaking, your wait is for a therapist that really understands and can help you is even longer. Anyone else? I see some heads nodding. Do you want to
I'll
chime
just
in on this question? Go ahead.
I'll chime in there. In particular, when you talk about why is it important that Black folks, Black women in particular, are resilient, and also thinking about mental health more broadly, why does it impact us? I think the reality is that we live in a country and in a society and a culture that does not love Black people, and most of all, it detests Black women. And successful Black women at that, women who are, resilient in all of the ways that we are, that we get up every single day. We face the world every single day, despite all of the things that come at us. And I think those are some of the things that we've got to think about. We hear about the healthy immigrant ideal, right? And many of especially in the Ontario context in Canada, but certainly across Canada, a lot of newer comer African, Caribbean, and Black folks to the country. We know the healthy immigrant ideal deteriorates generally for all immigrants, but certainly for Black immigrants, especially over generations. We see that deterioration of health from, the first generation to second generation, and so on and so forth, more broadly in health across the board, but also in terms of mental health. And that
Mhm.
sort of really is, for me, a reflection of, what's happening across the board for racialized immigrants, but certainly for Black folks, and really highlighting, in particular, an anti-Black society, and in particular, a society that does not love Black women, and especially strong Black women. So I think building resilience becomes ever more important in our communities and in our cultures. And there's lots of evidence to show that, in fact, our cultures are very resilient, and beyond that word resilient, because I don't always love that word resilient, our cultures are nested within them a deep sense of self that grounds our children and grounds our young women. And we've got to hold on and hold steadfast to that, because the challenge, of course, is that with every successive generation, we lose more and more of that cultural connection. And it's really important that we hold on to that.
Indeed, I think it's one of the main things that we're ignoring on the whole in every sector, the importance of that cultural connection. I think we tuned into it a bit with the rise of diversity, equity, and inclusion work because, we saw that emerging as culture is well-being, is health. Yeah, I appreciate that. Anyone else? Adibol, did you want to chime in on that question?
Oh, yes, I can do that. So for me, I came into this mental health work because of my family's experience as we moved to Canada 10 years ago, and there was a lot of, migration stress and systemic barriers that we experienced. And while all of that was happening, my daughter got to school and she experienced bullying and racism and girls in class that she couldn't play with them because she's a Black girl and they don't want to have any Black girlfriend. So my family started navigating that like from the second week that we arrived Canada, and there was no support from the school, no support from the principal, the teacher, and we just kept, navigating that all by ourselves, and we didn't get any like because the school did not support, we didn't even know where to go, so we had to do a lot on our own as a family, and from there I started speaking to newcomer moms in Toronto about their experience as newcomers. And I was hearing like a lot of stories. There was a shelter close to my house at that time, and I started visiting to just engage people, talk about wellness and mental health and support system and what that could look like. And that was how I started programming around mental health and wellness. And that continues today. It's 7 years already. And, every day we discover new
Mhm.
things and we need to continue
Yes,
to do the work.
I note that. And so with 7 years of doing this work, what strategies do you use with individuals and families to support them? Something that may
Yeah.
help others learn from and build resilience.
Yeah. So first I would say that I we believe that resilience is not just something to possess, because sometimes people feel like you just have to have resilience, right? It's something that needs nurturing. It's something that needs a safe space, support system. So at our organization, when we started, we just focused on creating that space, that community connection, which is the foundation for everything. Because when people don't feel like they belong in a space, when they don't feel like they're supported or they have a support system, it's difficult to even open up about other issues, bigger issues. So the first thing for us, the first strategy was to create that space and connection with people. So even when we didn't have a physical space, we were connecting with people, becoming friends with people, asking about their needs and how they want to be supported. We weren't making assumptions about people's needs. We were asking questions and showing them available resources and how we can help as a group, as an organization. And that was how as we were identifying their needs, we started building programming around it. So again, we started what we call Sports for Mental Health, which is a program where young people come together. They do Afro dance, they do salsa class, they do soccer and basketball. So again, that's around prevention. So we're doing early intervention so that we don't get bigger mental health issues. There's also craft for mental health, where they come around and do creative arts and conversations, and we have speakers. Sometimes it's just peer support, and they're doing different creative activities. And now we have young people who come after school hours and come to the center to do different things that they want to explore. Sometimes some people just come and just want to sit and have, snack, or just have, conversation with a child and youth care worker, just like that. So, and then
Yes.
for the women, it also started like that. We started what we call women's wellness and vocational programming. And that's around doing things like sewing and hairdressing and cooking classes. Again, just conversations. And then learning, also gaining skills that could help them economically to start small businesses. And from there, we were hearing bigger needs. People were talking about gender-based violence and intimate partner violence. As we were discovering those things, we were also creating support and services for each of those areas. So
I
that's what
understand.
we
So it's kind of the arts programs and the skills-based programs, entrepreneurship is a way to start the conversation, to get people in,
absolutely.
and then they open up more. So it actually takes me to a question that I had for Alethea. In dealing with many people who have a lot of stigma around saying, I have a mental health challenge. People don't readily admit to that. Oh, so we lost her. So I'll just pose that question to the other panelists. I think there's a lot of stigma in our community and a distancing from diagnosis and from therapy and all those things. You don't want to be seen as, being mad or, having a label attached to it. So how do you propose that we could deal with that? And I like Ed Bola's approach. I think through the arts based and skills based. But what comments might you have as panelists about that as well? Go ahead, Dr. Wilson. I saw you
Yeah,
unmuting.
I
You
just
can.
want to, I wanted to make sure the other speaker didn't want to speak first. Yeah, I'm also thinking about this, because madness is one facet of it, right? The other aspect of it is stereotypes that come with it. And I think that that is also what damns us into the stigmatizing aspect of things that you're talking about. And what I mean by that is, um, the stereotype of the angry mad black woman, right?
Mm, yeah.
Or as my colleague Dr. Adil Abdullah, he writes about, which around anti-black Satanism, which is the sort of a carceral logic that is used to deal with people who are black people who are dealing with mental health crisis. The number of calls of crisis when black folks are in mental health need, and they result in those people being killed by police instead of being
Uh,
hanged. Right.
mm,
And there's quite a
mhm,
few of them that date back to from my record, date back as early as 1988. And so, really thinking about Blackened Madness as it's never just the fact that we're dealing with mental health crisis, it's the other layers of anti-Blackness in that that then makes it a sort of a dangerous situation to be in sometimes. And so,
mhm,
while we can talk about the stigma as like, yeah, there's this stigma that, and it's a real stigma that is that I think exists in our cultures and in our communities. And then there's the other aspect of it, which is that it's also dangerous in many ways
mhm,
and
mhm,
harmful
mhm.
to have a mental health crisis as a Black person because of the anti-Black nature of the culture that we are living in.
Right.
So I just wanted to, that
No,
was my.
yeah, no, that's an excellent point. I actually had similar thoughts and experiences when we were going through the COVID situation, where
Mm,
people did not want to get vaccinated in our community, and that was stigmatized as being irresponsible and following social media hoax theories or conspiracy theories, when in fact we have a long history of being abused in medical settings
yes.
and really have a good reason to not be. So I do take that. I think it's more than just stigma. It is an adaptation and a reasonable fear that we have of
Yeah.
the system. Yeah.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
like, I mean, just about the COVID situation and all of the questions that were raised about that. Yes, our communities got disproportionately sort of stigmatized as, oh, we're being irresponsible. While at the same time, fast forward, we're now in 2026 post viral, moment of COVID. And there are increasing numbers of scientific research papers talking about the link between the vaccine and myocarditis. So,
Right. Yeah.
so the suspicion is not unfounded, is what I'm going to say.
And it certainly was not. Yeah. So Alethea, thank you for coming back to us. And we were just discussing the question of the things that keep us away from seeking treatment. And how do you experience that and cope with that as a therapist?
Um, Great question. Hey, thanks for asking me that question. I was just listening to what Dr. Sian was talking about, the fact that, and I'll just use COVID for an example, and um, working in the hospital system and then moving into my private practice is what I did during COVID. I noticed a huge barrier and stigma around families who chose to get the vaccine versus the ones that did not, and people actually seeking out support. Access looks different for different people, and we know based on our own income level that some people may have the ability to pay for extra services. But if you are a family of five and you are looking to access care, you're on a list with other public organizations that may have limited spaces. And there's no guarantee, even though it might say Black specific or for Black families, the wait list to access services to get proper care might take anywhere from 6 months up to 2 years, which means that people only have another alternative, which is to have a job that provides you with benefits so that you can access something at a different level. Or something that I do in my practice is to mentor and train psychotherapists so that we can provide that opportunity to our community that may not have the ability to pay free services for a full year. And I find that once they're able to see that they can have that support consistently at the time when they need it, then they are more likely to attain those services. And then the other thing that I'm finding, we are in a society here where we have a lot of therapists, but cultural competent therapists is a total different ballgame. And Janelle, you and I both know, and just like in the panel, that when we are looking at cultural specific care, we can only count on a handful of those organizations that understand our needs as people and can
Mm-hmm.
deliver that
Mm-hmm.
type of content that we need that really helps us with our healing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I mostly gravitate to, and that's what I've continued to practice, is to
Right.
create those spaces for ourselves, by ourselves, because you know that even to get those spaces, they're also limited too.
Right. And
And
so
I had that experience just a couple of months ago when we were looking for spaces for our healing shops, and through networking, we were able to get something that made sense.
I understand. So I think it's true. It's quite true that there are a whole host of issues around it. And you mentioned the idea too of precarious employment playing a role. Because many of the people in our community that may need mental health supports can't access them through an employee assistance program or through a benefits program because so there's a link then between the precarity of employment and those issues as well. So, in terms of thinking about this question, I want to go to Marriott again to ask how. What are the ways that your own journey, and you mentioned a little bit about that, really influences your outreach and what you do? Do you think that idea of not only cultural competence but lived experience can play a role in providing resilience and support?
100%. So I like
Oh,
when we all
yeah.
talked about resilience could mean a different thing, and we use that word so loudly. But resilient doesn't mean that we're strong or anything like that. It just means that whatever we're going through, which culturally, as Black women, we've been taught to carry a lot of pain. We've been taught not to talk about things that weighs us down. We've been taught to pray about things, be strong, keep pushing. What happens in the house stays in the house. So even if you're being beaten black and blue, you're financially abused, economical, physical, you just keep quiet. All of these messages sometimes from family could mean love and protection, but also meant that many people had to carry their pain in silence. So when I talk about, even to talk about those times I couldn't talk about my son being a neurodivergent child because some of my family felt it was a taboo for me to let people know. But I took my son at 3 years old and I went to seek for supports to find out what I can do to support him. And I started speaking loudly about it. The same thing when I had cancer, and a few friends and families, also particularly from our community, didn't want me to talk about it. It was not like they were against or they wanted me to have the disease. And I think it's just that way we've been molded to always hold things together, and because we've always felt like there was no support out there. If we go back to ancestral, lineage, our ancestors were actually treated like this. So we all have that intergenerational trauma where we've also find ways to, exhibit pain in different ways. And that means in silence. And silence just makes things even worse. And I think as Alicia was talking about, assessing support, yes, I started speaking loudly about this because if we can start talking and have conversation in regards to mental health, mental wellness, it encourages, it resonates with other people listening. So when I speak about everything that I've been through, which is enormous, I see a lot of my representation. People start coming to me and start talking about their own pain, what they're carrying, looking for ways for support. And sadly, we talked about the long wait in getting support is really ridiculous in this country. And our community face less the gap in wealth is like, if I could use the word crazy, there is still a huge gap where people have lesser pay in comparison to other community. So when I started speaking about it, for us, exactly what Adebola does is economical improvement, resources, education, find ways to gain new skills, find ways to career transition, better opportunity, better pay. We don't really talk about that, but we always get less pay. So many things like we could really bring into play. So for me, I think the highlight for me was that I actually broke that taboo, the cost of talking about it. And that also helped me and helped other people. So that conversation, we use the power of storytelling in Better Know Better to actually create more awareness and for others in the different communities to see what exactly is happening in our own community as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very rich comment. I think it does help because there's a believability and a relatability to you having come from the experience when you,
Mm.
and I'm sure that's helped you in creating programs. We've talked around the term resilience and so on, and I know there's a discomfort with it that has been expressed. In thinking about that, it really does emphasize individual strength and resilience and so on. But I think we also touched on something that is a factor in this, and that is building overall community resilience. And so, if we stay on that and take it away from maybe it being you have to be a resilient, strong Black woman or a strong Black person, or you have to be able to code switch, take all of this and just walk into a room smiling anyway. What are some of the things that we can do to build community resilience in your view? Anyone who wants to comment on that?
If you don't mind me to chip in, because I really wanted
Absolutely. Yeah.
I really wanted to mention about therapy, something as a taboo in our community, and we need to start getting more involved with. So, um, and based on the conversation I've had with a lot of people, that when they have access to even therapy from their employer, they have this belief that the employer knows that they've gone to seek therapy and it will affect their other promotional opportunities. So there is a kind of belief that sometimes I don't know where that line is and how true that fact is, but I think we need to continue the narrative of creating that going for therapy hasn't got anything to do with weakness, it's actually courage. And therapy is never a sign that you're broken, it's an investment in your well-being. So seeking support is not abandoning your faith or culture, is honoring your humanity. So we need to come back. There's a lot of things that affect our community, and there's a lot of things that affect us within our community that we need to talk about. And all of this idea of culture taboo or faith does not allow you to go for therapy. I think we need to start looking more into honoring humanity and how healing can really happen when we start seeking that support. And I want to encourage anyone listening. Yeah, therapy, if you just like we have Alicia, we're very lucky to have her here. Like look for culturally responsive care that can support you, that understands what you're talking about. Because the broken line here and the gap is that, as Alicia said, there's a lot of therapy which we're really experiencing here in British Columbia, but there is less culturally responsive therapy, and that's where the issue is mostly. But I want to encourage anyone that please, if you feel someone you know or yourself need to talk to a therapist, look for a therapist who is culturally informed, or if you can even start by talking to someone that isn't, but it's so critical that we do that.
Anyone else want to comment on this question?
I was just going to say that there's actually a network of therapists, all Black, Indigenous, or people of color, who do offer services through a network. So if you're looking, and I'm sure if you asked for culturally competent therapists, so people who weren't just Black in presenting, but Black in terms of their way of practicing therapy, you would be able to find that. So there exists those networks is a thing I'm going to say, and I only know this from being a part of the Black, Indigenous, and Racialized Web, which is a psychologist, psychotherapist web that we meet and convene and have different actions. And so this particular therapy hub was mentioned. You can access them online and you can, get in touch with therapists. I will just sort of highlight that for folks that there are resources out there and growing numbers of them, at least for the time being. We know that in the United States, they're cracking down on such networks, calling them racist or reversed racist, in the sort of white supremacist vein that we've seen for the last almost 2 years now. And so just, being cognizant that being in Canada, these things do exist, seek them out. So that was what I was going to say.
I wonder if you could give us that direct reference for our listeners because they have the ability to access it through the chat and
Oh
we
yeah,
can
I
also
can do that.
call
Yeah.
it out loud. Yeah. So, Adebola, did you want to comment? I was going to
Yes.
ask you a direct question, but go ahead. Mhm.
Oh, okay. I wanted to comment about building community resilience. I
Yes.
think there's a lot that we still need to do in terms of education and awareness. There's still a lot of stigma around mental health and wellness in the Black community. And I think we just need to keep doing the education, creating awareness, and also collaboration is another big thing. I know there's a lot of people and programs and activities around mental health and wellness, but most of us are working in silos. So, and I think we need to start working together collaboratively. I know that in York region, all of the Black-led organizations doing mental health work are now working together to provide an intervention program within the schools in the York region. And that is amazing. So that can be a very big support for that community in general. So I'm also thinking about how much disconnection we have in terms of faith-based organization and churches, mosques, and other places. They're also a very strong support system for people. They build connections, and until we can make that connection, we're still going to be missing a lot of things. So at Afro Women right now, we offer our GBV and IPV workshops in churches now. We've taken them, we do them in the community, but we also now go to church on Sunday to do an hour session on mental health or on GBV and IPV. And we can engage with people, have conversations, share resources and all of that. And because some people in the churches and mosques may not come to the community center for whatever reasons. But if we go there on Sundays, we can better make those connections. So I'll say collaboration is very important. Education and awareness has to be ongoing. And so that way we can be able to dismantle the stigma and let people know that, we all can improve our mental health and wellness.
Yes, and I understand there's also a hub forming in Peel for Black mental health. Yeah, so I attended it's Black Health and Soul. I'm just looking it up on my computer here. Black Health
Okay.
and Social Services Hub of Peel. And so that is really they're dealing with mental health, addictions, all of those things as well. So I think it's popping up because there've been some resources coming to look at Black mental health. And I was involved in the Black mental health consultations of community in York Region. And we recently launched a report that really doesn't reveal new stuff, but it is specific to what they're going to be doing with the community in York Region. And that's great because the type of collaboration that you're talking about exists there with about 5 different organizations from Aurora to Markham to Newmarket, and then ones that have the entire region as part of their catchment, and they're doing this work. So I do agree that collaboration is an important part of building that community resilience. And that actually also takes it away from the individual having to go and figure out where can I find a therapist and how can I help myself when they're personally in crisis. If we had that community of support around, I think it would be helpful. So I wanted to ask you about your work as a registered early childhood educator and a social worker and an interventionist, that in particular your work with immigrant families and children. And so what would you have to share about how these families could be better served by a coordinated system?
Yeah. So in terms of what we do at Afro Women, we just focus on strengthening protective factors. So the family system is always the first place where people get those connections and support. So what does that look like for every family? We tend to go from there. What's available? What could we strengthen? What are the gaps that we're seeing? And then we provide resources in that area. Another thing we also do is connecting agencies. So we have a newcomer family struggling with housing. We have different organizations that we collaborate with, and we refer them there. We also have connection and a partnership with CMHA in Sudbury, Manitoulin. So they offer what we call the Mental Health 101 workshops, and it's free. So when families or newcomers need that, we organize and they jump on Zoom sessions. Sometimes it's in person, and we offer that to families. We're also seeing that there's a lot of gaps in terms of services for Black men. And when we're working with children, when we're working with women, it's important to also make sure that we're connecting with the men. So we recently launched a program. It's called a Black Community Health and Wellness Fair. So at that event, it's focused on everyone, like children, men, women, everybody can come. And we do on-site testing. We do BP, we do HIV testing, we do hepatitis C, and it's all free because we connect and collaborate with other agencies offering the services. So that has helped us to be able to do more for all Black people or Black families who are newcomers. So again, I would say, to answer your question, it's all about identifying the needs and again, making connections to those resources and bringing everything together.
Excellent. And do you find that newcomers face extra challenges because of being new to the
Yes,
country?
they are not. Yeah, they are not able to
Mhm.
afford the therapy sessions. We don't have culturally responsive therapists in the entire Northern Ontario where I live in Sudbury. I think we only have maybe one person who is a social worker, not like really. I'm not sure if she's now a registered psychotherapist, but I know she's a registered social worker. So again, that's a big gap in terms of services. But what's available? What could we use when we're kind of still exploring other things, right? So yeah.
I think too, you're raising the issue of remote living
Yes.
as
Remote
an additional
communities.
challenge. So if you think about that, you're a newcomer to the country, you're a person who is part of a community that is underserved already, stigmatized and mistreated in the system. And then you're living remotely and having trouble. So if we know that some of the things that lead to success in dealing with mental health challenges include culturally appropriate care, then you're really in a crisis situation. So what are the numbers like of Black people coming into Sudbury right now? Or
We don't have, so there's no central place where we kind of collate all the numbers, and we are only one of the agencies serving newcomers. So I'm not able to give like a particular figure to that question, but the numbers are growing because again, international students are still coming in, and because it's also a city or cities where French is big. So we have a lot of Francophone also coming in, right? So, but the services, the culturally responsive services is still missing. It's not a lot.
understood.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
Well,
stigma.
there's certainly
Stigma,
yes, I guess
stigma is
it's in there
another
too.
one. Yeah.
Yes.
But I think we've talked about stigma a lot right now. So I'll just stop
Okay.
there.
Oh, no, it's good. So in terms of looking at Black communities talking about mental health, it is something that we avoid talking about. But how do we start those conversations? Not necessarily in a program or if we have a physical location where people can come to. How would you suggest, from your experience, that these conversations get started in our families and in our wider communities so that we can start the process of building that community support and sharing some of the information that we're sharing here about the resources that might be available? Any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So I think I work a lot with young children as a registered early childhood educator. We need to let children know that it's okay to have different emotions. And we also need to help them to be able to label those emotions because that's where it's actually start from. When children are not able to identify what's happening to them, they cannot name them. And because many of us come from countries where when you say you're sad, some people say, oh, why are you sad? You shouldn't be sad. But that's an emotion that somebody's having, right? And we can look at why they're feeling sad and what could we do to make them feel better. So until children begin to have those conversations and those conversations are normalized in families, then the issue of stigma will continue to be there. So, and also when people, for example, there was an IPV situation recently in my city, and we lost a woman, and instead of being supportive and empathy and all of that, we were hearing so many stories about how this person must have done this for this to have happened, blaming the victim. And that really made me sad. So after that experience, we did a lot of education and awareness around IPV and GBV because we saw that there's a lot of misunderstanding. There's a lot of perceptions that we needed to deal with. So, and that brings us back to education and awareness. And I think
Sorry,
parents,
could I ask you to pull out those acronyms, IPV and GBV?
okay, intimate partner violence and
Mhm.
gender-based violence.
Thank you.
Sorry, conditional.
Okay, go on.
Yeah. So we saw that there's a lot of gaps in education in those areas, and we just started rolling out those workshops. And that's why I said we're now going into churches. And last week we had an event which was centering men's voices in GBV and IPV because we saw that we cannot deal with these issues without involving men, in the conversations. So that's what we're doing. It's a lot of education, it's a lot of awareness, and also making young children know that it's okay to have, some feelings and name them and helping them to explain what that could look like and also offering support. So those are
Understood.
some of the
Okay.
strategies.
Thank you
Yeah.
so much. So, Dr. Wilson, I wondered if we could go a little bit deeper and talk and hear from you about some of the pressing challenges that Black people are confronted with when they enter into the sphere of mental health care.
Yeah, and I think you sort of actually started the conversation in talking about just the distrust that exists between Black communities and the healthcare institution. And that goes back historically because, as we know, especially in the world of mental health and psychology, but even beyond that, in the broader health field, the reality is that Black communities have been harmed more than they've been helped by government institutions such as the healthcare institution. And this goes back to everything from the for example, the entire branches of gynecology were built on the experimentation on enslaved Black women's bodies without their consent, because of course, if you're not really human, you don't need to give consent or get consent in order to be a part of experimentation. And so that's one example. We have, of course, the infamous case of Henrietta Lacks and the lack of informed consent there in terms of the use of her biological material to build the entire branch of stem cell research. So there's a plethora of examples like that. I've just mentioned two of them, not to mention the amount of our biological specimens that exists in museums and hospitals and all manners of things that we don't even know about what's going on in terms of how they're being used. And so there is, I would say, a reasonable and healthy skepticism of the healthcare industry as a whole. You add to that the reality that our Indigenous brothers and sisters here in Canada are going through a current legal case where they were forced and coerced into sterilization up until
Mhm.
as recently as 2019.
Yeah.
And so those are documented cases in our country right now happening in Saskatchewan. And so there's no feint of an imagination here as to what might be happening in the healthcare system, that it is nefarious. It is never, it's not really operated to our benefit. And as a result, there's a healthy skepticism there. Folks, whether we're looking at young people, older Black folks do tend to avoid healthcare institutions where they can and where possible. You add to that the other layers that we've also already mentioned, which is that it's becoming increasingly difficult to find a general practitioner, a doctor for general needs. There are fewer and fewer Canadians with access to a doctor in the public healthcare system. And so, these things sort of build and accumulate as to some of the barriers that we're actually seeing on the ground
Mhm.
in terms of the few numbers of Black folks who do actually have access to a primary healthcare provider on a regular basis. And certainly for issues like healthcare that are niche specific issues that come with them, all of the things that we said, stereotypes and stigma and the rest of it. And you can then sort of see why this is a pretty dismal picture for a lot of Black folks in terms of tending to their mental health in a very meaningful way. I think that there is hope in terms of seeing the sort of plethora of Black psychologists and psychotherapists that are coming out of the woodwork and making it known that they're doing this work, and banding with others to form hubs to offer care for Black, Indigenous and racialized people. And so there's hope in that. There's also a growing next generation of kids that actually, like you said, can speak about their feelings, can articulate what's happening, can say, "Mom, I think we might need therapy
Yeah.
because I need to
Yeah.
talk about this," right? So the
Yeah.
next generation is kind of schooling us in a lot of
Yeah.
ways
Yes,
on
they
on
do.
a lot of this conversation. And so there's hope in that. There is a lot of hope in that.
Yeah, that is true, and I think that it is happening. I've noticed it in my own family, but I've also noticed some other things in the family, and that is that we had an experience where I have a relative, a younger relative, who is mentally ill, has a diagnosis, and so on. And when we were seeking help, we found out about this really wonderful program that exists that you have to have $4,000 a month to put him in order to get the type of care that he deserves. What I heard though was that, I just want to tell the story so that, because I know you probably have similar stories. What I heard though was that you could get into that premium program if there was a sort of a dual diagnosis of the mental health and addiction. And then I think they had to have one other thing, that they had committed a crime or something like that, or they were a threat to harm. For, I don't know if you've heard about this, but then they could get the program funded through the healthcare system. They could get into the program that way. And I got to tell you that, not, I don't want to tell all of the family secrets, but just to say that I think the, I suspected that the result on the addictions test was not correct, and the other two criteria were met. And my relative was not allowed into the program, right? And when I talked to a friend of mine who is in dealing with addictions all the time, he said they reserve those spots for people that don't look like us. So I'm wondering if you concur. I mean, because it's anecdotal, it's just one story. You're working in the sector. Might you shed some light? Should I, be thinking that this is true of our system, that there is actual active racism happening like that?
I would say yes.
Yeah.
Oddly, we shouldn't shy away from speaking the truth. Even simple thing like me going into the hospital and advocating for myself. I want a butterfly needle because I have tiny veins. Don't use that needle on me to pull out blood. And the nurse will not listen to me. And she was like, "This is what I have. I don't care what you have. This is what I need, not even want." And that led me taking this to the chief medical officer, and they later apologized. So there's little elements like that. things still happen, and I hear bigger stories from friends and family too. So there is, of course, there is a huge systemic barrier. There's racism, a lot of injustice. I think just we carry a burden just the way we look like, and that's one first thing that we need to deal with. You get
Yes.
into a room, and then your color already speaks for you in the sense that they don't, it's uncomfortable. And why should
Yeah.
it? I'm just as human as you are. So I
Yeah.
speak so much about humanity and bringing it everything back to, we're all equal and we need to start working towards this equity landscape thing because we say all these words, but the meaning is just about drawing strategy. I believe in action. So we need to start having conversation like this. They might be very uncomfortable for a lot of people to listen to, but if we don't continue having this conversation, it's going to be swept under the carpet. And if you look at back into history, it looks like we're repeating everything that has happened again. It's like a cycle, we're just like going through the cycle. So we need to be, while we're saying our children are standing up, yes, that's great. But I feel so highly embarrassed because my daughter actually questioned me and hold me accountable too. So I feel like it's great for us to start holding systems accountable. And when I mean my daughter holds me accountable, I mean she tells me things like, Mom, I think you need to get therapy. And I'll be like, yes, I think I need one. If I need one from the stress you're giving me and the stress of the community. But where I'm going is like we need conversation like this all the
Yeah,
time.
we do. We
Yes,
do.
because it's
We do,
never
you
going to
know,
change.
as you were talking, you reminded me, I just lost my mom last September to cancer. And she also had that experience that you described because she had really small veins. And I remember being at her in the hospital and as you're on the medication and so on, you could get a little bit more aggressive. And she would say to the nurse practitioners, please, or the nurses, I need this type of needle. Do not poke me here. And I would be like, Mom, calm it down. But I realized that you have to advocate for yourself because she described to me that one time she was in the hospital and 5 different people came to stick a needle in her arm because they believed that they could do it. And she kept saying, no, this is what I need in order for you to do it. And they didn't listen to her, as you're saying. So it really does affect our trust in the system, as you were talking about, Dr. Wilson. So whether we know about those historical things and those deeply
Because
painful
we're
things.
not allowed to advocate for ourselves because in my situation I had to raise my
Yeah,
voice and then you're deemed aggressive black woman. Black women are
right.
very aggressive
Back
because the
to the
only way you
stereotype.
can get to listen to me is for me to like stop. You're not, and then they'll be like, oh, I'm gonna like something wrong with this woman. So, but if it's a Caucasian woman doing that, they'll be like so lovely and polite. They'll run to the 100th floor to go look for the butterfly needle. But for me,
Right,
it's like what they have is what they have. So
right.
things like this we need to speak about our experiences because when I spoke about my experience, it resonated with you. So which means it's happening. So we
Yeah,
need to continue talking about things that we experience. This is the
most
way we
definitely.
can continue to stop it
Yeah,
because we can't keep accepting it. And it's so unfortunate. I'm never gonna apologize to anybody for me being black. I think it's the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm going to be in rooms where I don't look at rooms that I fit in right now. I look at the rooms if they fit me. So I mean, we need to start using all of those ways that we can show up for ourselves. And it's very hard for our community because oftentimes I see friends and family back away and they don't want to either advocate or they feel like, quiet. Oh, they don't have this needle, so I have to do with that. No, you can't because I know what's going to happen in my vein. I'm going to be bleeding and then you're going to have to focus on that. And that takes a long time for my blood to stop bleeding. So it's not happening. So there's just so
wow.
many things I could talk about that, but I could talk about so many other things that I've experienced.
I
Um,
really thank you. I mean, to tell you the truth, listening to your experiences and all of you speaking this afternoon has been therapy for me. And so I just want to say that, and I'm sure I'm seeing the reactions of our listeners as well. So understanding all of the challenges, I wonder if our comments as we go to the next part of this is to talk really about solutions and the ways that we can address some of those challenges. I think, I think it's happening somewhat with these hubs forming and with some advocacy happening and increased the fact that our children are even open to talking about going to therapy now represents some change that has happened. But what else do we need to do practically now, today? What can we do to address some of these challenges? Just unmute if you're ready to speak. Go ahead, Alethea.
So, hey, I just think I mean, I was just listening to what everyone was saying, some amazing points. And I think right now we just need to continue having those conversations. I really was happy to hear Adebola say that young people don't recognize that much of the stigma because they have already been in or trained, I don't know what you want to say, just to start talking about these things. So the more that we can just normalize those conversations, and even when you come home from work and say, hey, I had a long day or my day was a little bit frustrating, I think it's great to normalize things so that when they get into the workplace, they're not going to be stunted by that growth and feel frozen when they're not able to regulate themselves because they've already heard us say that, hey, it could be challenging, so that at least they know when they show up what to prepare for.
Yeah.
I'll tell a little anecdote about my own family history. So myself and my sister, we were both born in Jamaica, and then my youngest siblings, the two youngest siblings, were born here in Canada. And you have very different work ethics, very different. Like, I mean, the Canadian kids and the Jamaican kids, we call them two generations, two different generations, very different work ethics. My sister and I being the first generation immigrants, like very much different, just a different work ethic and mental health, as we've been saying, come secondary to all of that because you've got to be that high performing, excellent Black person. And, if that's not our own exhibit of like imposter syndrome, I'm not sure what is, but, it is, right? In a lot of ways, we overperform, right? We overperform in every single level. And then you've got the Canadian kids who, for the first time in my family's history, we were contending with mental health. We were contending with like conversations around, maybe I need a therapist. Maybe a therapist is something that's needed in this particular situation. And it, having to, tap into that. And so I think back to that sort of generational shift that we're seeing where it's becoming a conversation. The other part that I will say, and I said it earlier, there's increasing research. There was actually just a research study, I can't remember the author, coming out of the United States that demonstrated it. And she specifically looked at Jamaican immigrants to the United States. And what they found amongst Jamaican women specifically was that a grounding in their culture and their Jamaican identity was the sort of force that really balanced out all of the things in their life. It balanced out their mental health. It sort of reaffirmed their identity and who they were and all of the things that we know are safeguards against, mental health crises. And so, that's really, really important as well is culture, identity, groundedness in who we are. And so holding on to all of our diverse African, Black, and, Caribbean identities, I think is really, really important in our cultures, especially again, in a space, in a place that does not always love us and have space for us, right? I will also say that this becomes increasingly difficult. So when we look at our Black Canadian sisters and brothers, and what I mean by that are folks that are several generations in country. So we're talking, Black Nova Scotians, Black Ontarians. They have hundreds of years of existence in Canada. It's harder when you've been facing white supremacy for multiple generations, right? So I will also acknowledge that's easier said than done. Probably easier for us that are first and second and third generation to Canada than those of us who've been here hundreds of years and are contending with white supremacy on an intergenerational level. And so I will acknowledge that. that becomes a challenge. And we see the outfall of that in our Black communities that have been here longer. And so just sort of highlighting that. The last thing that I'll also point out is a study out of NYU recently also demonstrated that the way in which Black people exhibit crises such as schizophrenia or other conditions on the DSM looks different than their white counterparts. And as a result, a lot of Black people were underdiagnosed. They were not diagnosed for schizophrenia. They were not diagnosed for these different conditions because we're expressing it differently than our white doctors, for the most part, the gatekeepers, can identify. And so that's also something to take into mind, right? Again, going back to having someone who's culturally competent as your care provider might be much more important in instances like that, or knowing that, you know what, there is something wrong with me, and I'm going to find a care provider who's going to validate that. I'm not going to stop, and I'm going to advocate for myself, to Marriott's point, until I find someone who's going to support me in this, in what I'm experiencing.
That, you mentioned the DSM. Could you just tell our listeners what that is?
Oh yeah, so it's sort of like a psychological sort of metric scale for diagnosing different diseases and different disorders. If you, so you will psychological disorders that's been used. Yeah.
Okay. And so I recently was working in child welfare, and what I found was that the idea of racism being a factor in people's experiences and interactions and so on. And really there's no the I can't remember what it was called that they use to determine what the issue is in the child's life. There's nowhere to code for racism and for that impact of intergenerational trauma. I was really happy to see and applauding the work of the Indigenous people's child welfare agencies, because they were taking control of that and taking that into consideration and looking at intergenerational trauma. And I was just fascinated as well by the work on epigenetics that showed that we can unlearn those traits and things that come through the generations. So a lot of hope, but it sounds like, and what I'm taking away from what you just mentioned was the fact that we need good data as well, to research and data to support
Absolutely.
the actions and development of policy and change at the system level, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Geraldine Palmer is a psychologist in the United States, an African American scholar who is developing and trying to include racism, in particular anti-Black racism, in the DSM. So she's trying to find metrics or develop metrics that will do that work. It is a work in progress, I will say. And the other aspect of it, and the other reality of it is that they'll call it everything but racism. So, for example, in my field in public health, when we're looking at social determinants of health, we'll look at everything from childhood trauma to this to that, but to name it racism, there's a resistance to doing that, right? And that also is deeply seated in white supremacy. So we've also got to be cognizant of the systems that in fact we work in.
I think we ought to include denial of racism as a mental health condition. But in any case, do any of the other panelists want to chime in on this question of what are some solutions? What are some changes that we can make that you see immediately?
I think I'll just stick to the fact that, we need to keep talking about it, just encouraging more of the community to get support, maybe build a resilient cycle, trusted people who could provide support, encouragement, accountability, focus on what we can control instead of what we can't really, and continue to advocate for ourselves and others, right? So understanding what resilience really means, it's not about proving how much you can carry, it's about knowing what you don't have to carry, and that also includes in your professional setting. Sometimes I think Dr. Wilson mentioned about, overperforming, and it's the reality. We always want to overplease and overperform, especially in work. And it's the way we've been confirmed, and it's kind of part of intergenerational trauma as well, where we've been labeled out our blood and sweat, and we continue to do the same thing. So we overperform and overwork. I think it's just knowing when to let things down and know when we can carry things with others and, seek support within the community, build trust with people. And I think it was Adebola who mentioned that that could be tricky sometimes in our community, where we feel like if we talk about mental health within our family or even faith-based or whatever, it's very shameful and stigma. So those are
Yes.
challenges that we have, and that we have to find ways where we can break those cycle.
Okay. So, well, I'm so happy to have had this conversation with you, and I think what I'm taking away is that we do need to talk about it. We need to encourage those conversations in our families, at home, in our community, and sort of normalize it. We need to collaborate more. I heard that very strongly coming from you. And we need to find the courage to advocate for ourselves, bring our voice into the conversation when we're dealing with healthcare professionals, and also just to find the resources that are out there. And thank you to the panelists for sharing some of the resources. Alethea, you mentioned that one of the things you developed was training for psychologists to do some free services to the community for a year. Is there a resource link to that that can be shared in the chat? Okay, so I'm just asking that.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
I'll
Okay, go
definitely
ahead.
drop it on in the chat.
Okay.
Absolutely. I'll drop it in the chat for people. And they can have access for the year. And then in September, I increase my capacity because I usually have a little bit more students that want to work with me. And then we offer more spaces to more people. And the other thing that I'm finding are Black men like the Imani program that are in the community. And people can have access to those organizations. And, if there was a guide or directory where people can go to, and I think Dr. Wilson had mentioned a collective network, then those spaces just need to be advertised a little bit more so that people are aware of them. Yes, I just think that right now, this is a great time for us to be in the forefront of making sure that we have those services that are available to us. And collaboration is the key. I just completed a study, as you know, on social prescribing. What are the activities that help um, Black women relieve themselves of anxiety, stress, and depression? And we found that we have to do things in community. We heal ourselves in community. That's our cultural way. And there's many different things that we do just to bring back that joy and restore ourselves, whether it be
Beautiful.
religion, whether it be getting together, cooking a healthy meal. All of
Hmm.
these things are part of our self-care. And we
Yes.
just need to encourage women to do those things. They don't cost a lot, but at least they know that it's there for them to access. And the
I'm,
last
I'm,
thing I
I'm
wanted to mention is currently,
yes. Go ahead.
currently I'm in Grenada, and they
Mhm.
have a department called the Minister of Health and Wellness and Religious Affairs. So it's like a unit and a community dealing with things because West Indian people can be, or Caribbean people can be conservative when accessing that support. Um, department is really in they with their collective work in that area.
Okay, well, Mariette, it seems like Alethea is in the background where you are. I'm seeing palm trees going in Vancouver. So I just want to invite those who are listening to join next week for a generational dialogue on bridging wisdom, inspiring tomorrow, and building legacy together. And so this has been a wonderful conversation with you. I see that the references are going up for people to be in contact with our panelists who have resources to share with the community. I just want to thank you all for your wisdom sharing today and for your time. And I do like ending on the note that if we remember that our power to heal comes from being within our cultural practices, then we can find a way to make that happen. It's easy and cost free to really go back to some of the ways that we maintain our mental health and resilience through all of the struggles. And I really pay homage to our ancestors because I feel many times that our part of this conversation right now with everything that has happened in our history is that we are in the best possible time to share information openly with each other and to really see ourselves as one people. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts today, and I look forward to more from 100 accomplished Black women fireside chats in the future. Peace to you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.